Hello and welcome to another episode of Easy Eats. Today we're going to tackle another family favorite, the humble beef pie. We start off with 3 cups of flour and 250 grams of butter. Now the butter should be cool, not fridge cold. If it's fridge cold, it'll be very hard to work into the flour. We then carefully work it into the flour, taking care not to break up the butter too much. We want to see those little flakes, those little bits of butter inside, and they're going to give us that flakiness that we're looking for in the pastry. If it's still too dry, add a few tablespoons of water just to bind it together, help making it into a proper dough. We then season with a couple of pinches of salt, because salt again is the spice of life and we want it to taste like something other than flour and butter. Once that's done, we turn it out onto a floured surface and we work it together slowly. Now it might still be too dry, so we add a little bit of water, not too much, 1 tablespoon at a time. So eventually it'll start coming together. Again, be sure not to overwork it. Once you have it roughly into a ball, wrap it and let it rest in the fridge for about an hour. In the meantime, we take our beef and we cut it into about 1-inch cubes. Now you can use any kind of beef. Stewing beef is obviously the most affordable and works well just as any other cut, as long as there's not too much sinew and please no fat in it, because that'll remain flabby and will give you a very bad mouthfeel in the pie. We season as usual with salt and pepper. I usually like to use white and black pepper just to give a different flavor dimension, but whatever you have at home is fine. Now you can use a pressure cooker or a regular pot, just bear in mind that the cooking times vary. So we heat up about 3 to 4 tablespoons of cooking oil in the pot before adding the meat. As you can see, we sear the meat. We don't necessarily need to brown it. The brown color is going to come from the flour that's going to caramelize together with the meat juices in the bottom of the pot as we cook it. So don't worry too much if the meat itself is not getting too brown. We then add the flour, the stock cube, and about 2 cups of water, just to give it enough moisture to bind it all together and not dry out during the cooking process. If you're cooking in a pressure cooker, it's going to take care of itself. If you are cooking in a regular pot, you may have to add water from time to time to keep it from getting too dry. We then put on the lid. Now in a pressure cooker, it should take around 40 minutes. In a regular pot, depending on the beef cut, it can take up to about 2.5 hours. So while that beef is cooking, we go back to our dough. We remove it from the fridge, give it a few minutes to come back to temperature, and start working it into a flat sheet. It'll be a little hard to roll it out at the beginning, but as you go along, it'll become more pliable. At this point, don't worry too much about rips at the edges. You know, if they're not smooth, don't worry. Just keep rolling it out until you have about a 30 centimeter by 20 centimeter sheet. Now, the key to a good pie pastry is creating layers, flaky layers, and this is what we're going to do. So we fold over 1/3 of the sheet and then fold the other end over that, which will already give us 3 layers. Once we've formed a rectangle from that, we fold that rectangle in half as well, resulting in a square. And guess what? Once we have that square, we're going to repeat the whole process one more time to achieve those multiple layers. And just like before, we put the dough back in the fridge to give it some time to relax again. Meanwhile, the beef should be just about ready, and as you can see, the meat juices and the flour have mingled nicely. I also make sure that I scrape up those nice caramelized bits of flour on the bottom of the pot just for that extra flavor. And speaking of extra flavor, we're going to add a dash of Worcestershire sauce as well as a dash of soy sauce to the mix, both for color and taste. Now, if you don't have Worcestershire sauce, don't worry about it. Or if you don't have soy sauce, don't worry about it. Just make sure the flavor balance is right with salt and pepper. We're going to remove the pastry from the fridge and we're going to cut it in halves, using one half for the bottom sheet of the pie and the other sheet for the top part. So we're going to roll both out. So the first thing we're going to do is cut out pastry circles for the bottom of the pie. They should be slightly bigger than the tin that you're using, simply to give it some overlap and to accommodate the lid later. Make sure that you fit those into the tin snugly without any tears or holes, because we don't want the filling to ooze out in the cooking process. So once we've done that, we add the cool pie mix to the pies. Next up, we add some slices of cheese. Now, how much is entirely up to you, or you can leave the cheese out and replace it with mushrooms or fried onions or whatever the filling of choice is for you. In my case, I love the classic steak and cheese, so this is what we're going to do. Now, as before, using the other sheet that we've reserved from the pastry, we cut out pastry circles as lids for the pies, obviously big enough to cover the pie and to crimp into the bottom pastry so that there's a nice seal. It's important to get a nice seal because depending on the texture of your filling, it can ooze out during the cooking process, which we obviously don't want. Don't worry if the circles that you're cutting out are not even and not absolutely exact. I personally think the character of a pie lies in its unevenness and its rustic appearance. Finally, we're going to drizzle some milk over it. Now, you can use a pastry brush for a more even distribution. Again, I don't mind a rustic look, so in this case I just used a teaspoon, which is just as fine. Preheat that oven to about 180-190 degrees and pop them in for between 55 and 60 minutes, but just monitor the color. So once they're about that golden dark brown, they should be cooked. And after an hour, here we are. A tasty, flaky, crispy, cheesy, gooey, beefy steak and cheese pie. Now you can eat those fresh and hot, or you can even freeze them and reheat. And as I always say, have fun in the kitchen, so get creative with your fillings. You can use chicken, any kind of meat, vegetables, any kind of filling you like. As long as you have the pastry right, you will have a nice pie at the end. Now, thanks for watching, and tune into our channel and subscribe to see more of our easy eats.